So as a little bit about JNCC, we are the only statutory nature advisor to all 4 countries of the UK, providing a shared evidence base, fostering collective effort and collaboration amongst the countries and territories in pursuit of our common goals. We work across land and sea with partners throughout the UK, as well as our UK overseas territories and the Crown dependencies and many more around the world. So today's webinar will focus on terrestrial surveillance, development and analysis. And we have 4 exciting speakers from across JNCC and TEPoP. So Nikki Newton is a senior biodiversity evidence specialist at JNCC. She works across JNCC's partnership biodiversity monitoring schemes, supporting collaboration, data analysis, scheme development, and diversity, equity, and inclusion schemes. We have Dr. Michael Pocock from UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. He is an ecologist and is particularly interested in citizen science, and he is co-lead of the Biodiversity Monitoring and Analysis Group. We also have Diana Bowler from UK CEH. She's an interdisciplinary ecologist with a special interest in methods to make use of unstructured and heterogeneous data, particularly for insects. And last but not least, we have James Pearce Higgins, who is the Director of Science at the British Trust for Ornithology, where he oversees both their monitoring schemes and research. And this includes the long-term partnership between the BTO and JNCC. So finally, before I hand over, just a bit about today's session. Please make sure your cameras and microphones are muted during the presentation. But we do encourage you to ask questions using the Slido link or QR code that you'll find on an upcoming slide once we get going. And since we're using PowerPoint Live, you can navigate to that slide whenever you wish to. And Rosie's kindly just posted it in the chat. So Slido lets you upvote questions that you want to see asked, and you also have the option to ask anonymously if you wish. Or if you do include your name, we'll invite you when we come to that question if you would like to ask that question aloud and on screen. You're also welcome to put your hands up to ask a question directly at the end of the presentation, if you could sort of wait for that section. And our speakers have also kindly committed to provide written answers to any questions that we don't have time for today. And just to please be aware that the session is being recorded. The Q&A won't be recorded, however, just to ensure we can have a sort of open and hopefully engaging discussion. And if you do want a copy of that recording, you can reach out to the liaison email addresses to receive that. You are welcome to engage with the chat function. However, we're aware that that doesn't work for everyone from external organizations, so we won't be relying on that for questions. So that's all the housekeeping. I'm sure we're all keen to get going, and I'm going to hand over to our speakers for today's presentation.
Thanks very much, Sam. Thanks for all the introductions and for covering all that housekeeping. And welcome, everybody. It's great to see so many of you here today. I'm Nikki Newton, and I'm here along with my colleagues from UK CEH and BTO to talk about the work of the TSDA partnership. It's great to see a sort of broader audience than usual and to be collaborating with the JNCC Spotlight series. I think Sam mentioned it's the 5th in that series of events, and it's our 5th TEPoP event for this year as well. So good time to collaborate. As Sam mentioned, here's the Slido link and the QR code, which you can navigate back to at any point if you want to, and do just click on the link in the slide, and we will have a chat about the questions afterwards. So as I mentioned, this is the 5th and the last of our UK TEPoP events this autumn. We've hosted a series of workshops and webinars on a range of events, and these have all been recorded and added to our TEPoP YouTube channel if you're interested in looking back at any you missed. We will be writing up the discussions and workshops into written reports, and we hold these series of TEPoP events annually if you're interested in getting involved in future years by attending more events. So please do drop us an email using the address on the screen now if you want to. It'd be great to collaborate further with you. So to start off with, I just wanted to give a little bit of context for those of you who are perhaps less familiar with this area of work. So across the UK, the primary sources of national species evidence are species monitoring schemes, through which volunteer citizen scientists collect huge quantities of data And this covers a huge range of taxonomic groups, sort of monitoring them to varying extents, including bats, butterflies, plants, pollinators, birds, across the sort of larger schemes, right through to earthworms, fungi, beetles, and a wide range of other taxonomic groups in the supported through the recording schemes and societies, and that's supported by the Biological Records Centre. So many of these national monitoring schemes, and all those with the logos on the screen here, are run through partnerships between JNCC, non-governmental organisations, and the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. And the 4 country nature conservation bodies invest in these schemes through JNCC and are actively involved in steering and advisory groups for them. So up until 2017, JNCC was the sort of common partner across all these national monitoring schemes. However, we recognise that many of the challenges or the opportunities that are relevant for engaging volunteers with monitoring one taxon are often relevant for other taxa. So it would be really beneficial for organisations working across this space within the sector to work together. So with all of our partners, we established the UK Terrestrial Evidence Partnership of Partnerships, which was designed to bring together all these organisations involved in funding and organising and running and steering all these schemes to collaborate, to exchange ideas, and to work together on the sort of shared challenges that we all face in a more effective way. And then since TEPoP was founded 7 years ago, we've expanded the sort of official TEPoP network to welcome several other organisations into our discussions who are keen to collaborate on common areas of interest. And I'm sure many of you are on the call today, so hello. At this point, I just wanted to draw out one point. You'll hear us talking today about structured and unstructured data, and I've on this slide got a sort of structured data collection box and unstructured data collection box as kind of 2 very distinct categories, but they really form quite a continuum. So on the one end, you've got the very highly structured data, and by this we mean where we are asking volunteers to record in particular places, at particular times of years, and in certain ways. And then at the other end of the spectrum are the very unstructured records, which are where volunteers themselves have decided when and where and what and how to record. And there are kind of lots of states between these 2 extremes, but data from across this spectrum of recording can be useful in different ways and for different analyses, as we'll touch on today. So why is UK TEPoP data important? Well, these schemes provide the data which informs us about species change at a national level over the long term, and this is really, really valuable data. And there's no alternative source of this information at an equivalent scale, so covering a wide geographical area across the UK with a large annual sample, and that means sort of about over 15,000 locations across the UK recorded combined across the sort of larger, more structured schemes, and many thousand more unstructured records on top of that. Several schemes are designed to sample the UK in a way that reduces bias, or they're designed to suit volunteer recording, but correcting for biases during analyses. And each scheme has a rigorous and transparent verification process to ensure high standard and uniformity of all the data collected. This really high standard of the monitoring scheme data means the trends produced are published as official statistics, including forming the basis for a number of the UK biodiversity indicators. The data that's underpinning the official statistics are produced by JNCC and partners to the highest possible standard and contribute to the policy decisions made at a national level. The current UK biodiversity indicators were designed to track progress towards the Aichi targets of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and they form a key part of the UK CBD reporting. But we could see, however, that the data from species monitoring schemes has the potential to be useful beyond the national trends that it provides. So the thought bubbles on this slide show a kind of spectrum of different ways that we can explore analysing or developing the schemes further to shed new insights on how nature is changing and the causes of these changes. So we can look at analysing data in new ways, gathering new data using new technologies to complement the existing recording that's occurring, or through making small or large changes to the data that we support volunteers to record. So given all these potential areas to explore, alongside developing UK TEPoP as a collaborative space for scheme partners, in 2017 we also established the Terrestrial Surveillance Development and Analysis Partnership between JNCC, UKCEH and the British Trust for Ornithology, BTO. And sort of as it says on the tin, TSDA seeks to add value to terrestrial surveillance, which is another way of saying national biodiversity monitoring, by undertaking cross-scheme analysis and by developing analytical and volunteer capacity. So we currently focus our work on 3 grand strategic challenges that we've identified with TEPoP as facing the sector. So firstly, we seek to meet additional needs for evidence, and this involves exploring how the long-term TEPoP datasets can answer new and policy relevant questions. Secondly, we're exploring the potential for schemes to record new types of data alongside existing recording and the benefits that this can bring. Where appropriate, we're supporting schemes to incorporate these new types of data collection and analysis in a way that's sustainable for those involved. And thirdly, and underpinning the other 2 challenges, is to undertake these developments in a way that works for volunteers. So the volunteer recorders are fundamentally important in all of this work. So ensuring a degree of co-development for schemes with them is essential to ensure their sustained involvement. So TSDA adds value to the species monitoring schemes through collaborative partnership working, bringing in the funding and scientific expertise from across the 3 partner organisations. We aim to tackle strategic development challenges for monitoring that are shared across countries and NGOs and the sector more widely. So in this space where funding is often quite limited and many organisations must focus their budgets on meeting these operational needs, TSDA provides this really valuable space at a relatively low cost to really efficiently explore shared challenges, so we can ensure that the UK biodiversity monitoring can continue to evolve and respond appropriately despite the constraints in the sector. And we work closely with representatives from across TEPoP organisations in order to ensure our work sort of works for schemes and datasets and data users and volunteers. So at the start of the partnership, we undertook a needs assessment across CNCBs and governments to help to steer where we could make an impact. And this has helped to shape what we've done so far. We've also been steered annually by a CNCB advisory group, as well as discussions with our NGO scheme partners through TEPoP events such as this one, and through task-specific steering groups, which we form each year. And this steer is extremely valuable and important to TSDA's work. So we thank everybody who's been involved in those meetings. So we've produced, as of yesterday, 33 different publications over the 7 years since the TSDA partnership was established. And these range across a wide range of work areas, as on the slide at the moment. And we've got many more in the pipeline currently at various stages of preparation. So there's loads we could explore and discuss. And we can't go through all the findings from all our work in today's session, but we aim to provide an idea of the sort of things we've been exploring. And if you're interested in finding out more, then please do explore our TSDA web pages further. I just wanted to emphasise that TSDA is dependent on the continued investment from the 4 UK countries to support the underlying monitoring schemes and all the evidence they collect. This is really valuable evidence, and TSDA can't develop or analyse anything without it to build on it. So I think that's it for me for now. I'd like to hand over to James Pearce-Higgins now, who's going to tell us a bit more about the work we've been doing under Challenge 1, which is on adapting to new requirements for evidence. So over to you now, James.
Thank you very much, Nikki, for that excellent overview. So I'm going to talk through Challenge 1, which, as you can see from this slide here, really aims to fill some key data and knowledge gaps, and particularly provide a mechanism for applying a lot of the information that comes out of the schemes to policy relevant areas by developing and applying new analytical approaches, exploring new metrics, communicating and looking at what the TEPoP data, scheme data, can be used for, and really trying to drive improvements in those schemes and those outputs to maximise the impact of all of our collective work. And you can see here a couple of nice quotes from NRW staff about how they sort of find the benefits of this. I'm going to be talking around one particular area of work, which I'll come on to in a minute, but that is only one of a number of different, a large number actually, of different areas of work we've undertaken in this area. I've just highlighted a few of them on this slide, so we've done quite a lot of work looking at modelling the responses of birds and butterflies in an urban environment to features of that urban environment, whether it's the amount or the quality of different green spaces. And the aim there really is very much to try and improve our understanding of how actually we can manipulate and improve the urban environment to benefit biodiversity, and of course also in doing so to benefit the people who are living there. We've undertaken a literature review on the effects of air pollution on birds, which highlights generally negative associations where those have been studied, but there is a very biased literature, biased by geographical location and also by the species that have been looked at. That's also in the peer-reviewed literature. And we also did some work looking at the potential for using our schemes to understand the risks associated with non-native invasive species. And again, that resulted in a peer-reviewed publication. So do have a look at the TEPoP pages where there will be links to each of these publications there. And we very much aim to produce these outputs in the peer-reviewed literature because that provides an additional kind of stamp of quality assurance on the evidence that we're providing. But as I've said, what I want to do today is really focus on one key area, which is that of looking at protected area effectiveness. And this is, I think, a nice example to focus on because actually our first work from this came out actually from a workshop that I attended that Nature Scott led on in 2019 and 2020 around the monitoring of protected sites in Scotland. And that led to a consideration actually, well, what can we learn from our existing large-scale monitoring schemes? We know that protected sites, or we think that protected sites are a key cornerstone of biodiversity conservation, but there has been and a growing literature on trying to understand their effectiveness. How well are they able to maintain population trends against a number of threats? What's their relevance in a changing climate and so forth? And what we've tried to do through this work is particularly to use, as I said, the large-scale long-term terrestrial surveillance schemes to provide that evidence for the UKRA across many taxa. And this is clearly work that's relevant to commitments to understand what benefit we might have for signing up to 30 by 30, so 30% of So I'm going to talk through several different pieces of work. The first was led by UKCEH and published in Biological Conservation. And this analysed those biological recording scheme data that Nikki referenced earlier to really look at the occurrence and trends in the occurrence of a number of different taxonomic groups here. Ants, bees, hoverflies, ladybirds, spiders and wasps, and really trying to compare and contrast those trends between and occupancy between non-protected sites in orange and the protected sites in that map in blue. What did this work show? So firstly, what Rob Cook looked at was the association between protected sites and species richness. So what proportion, or what's the average number of species across those sites which protected areas tend to support? This graph shows in orange the average value of species richness for that unprotected site, and then in blue for the protected site. And the difference between those two is then shown by that kind of grey element on the right hand side, showing that contrast between the two. So this highlights that there is a strong significant difference in species richness. So our protected sites are definitely supporting a greater proportion, a greater number of species across those different taxonomic groups than the unprotected sites. And that difference is statistically significant. So that grey polygon doesn't overlap across those two dotted lines, for example. Then, if we look at trends through time, so that's I mean, that's firstly this could be down to two things. It could be down to benefits of those protected sites, but also it could be down to the fact that those protected sites are just targeting the most biodiverse places. So the next question then is, how effective are they in terms of supporting kind of species conservation? And here what we're looking at is changes in occupancy trends through time. So what I've shown you here is, what you've got here is two trend values showing average trends in occupancy, mean occupancy of species within protected sites in blue and unprotected sites in orange. And here there's actually no statistically significant difference in those trends. Both of them show a slight downward element through time. Always the protected trend is higher than the unprotected, so the protected values are higher than the unprotected values, which aligns with what I've just shown you in the previous slide. But broadly speaking, there's evidence for declines in occupancy on both protected and unprotected sites. And interestingly, those declines are steepest for the commonest and most widespread species. Rob did also look at changes in between different taxonomic groups, and there was actually a more positive story for pollinators, showing evidence that actually pollinators were better able to colonize and protected sites relative to non-protected sites, so a benefit of that protection, but that wasn't apparent across the other taxonomic groups. And now I'm going to focus on work that we led at the BTO, looking more specifically at birds. We've got a wealth of different scheme data, and this shows the value of these different schemes and different monitoring components to look at the effects of protected areas on occupancy, as we've just looked at for the invertebrates, but also on abundance, on trends in those features, and also uniquely using our bird ringing data to look at breeding success, which gets us closer to understanding the mechanisms behind some of these patterns. So firstly, looking at occurrence, colonization and persistence, and these were data from our breeding bird atlas, comparing the 2007 to 11 atlas with the 88 to 91 atlas. And what these graphs show you is the average effect size. So if the dot is above the line, that shows a positive association with protected areas. And we've separately looked at 4 different categories of protected areas, all protected areas on the left, triple SIs in orange, and the SPAs, which are protected areas that are designated under European legislation, particularly for birds, and the SACs, which are designated under European legislation, but for other taxa. And you can see a very strong positive effect of protected areas on occurrence. So protected areas tend to support more bird species than non-protected sites, and also on colonization and persistence. So that shows that actually between those 2 atlas periods, more of the colonizations of bird species occurred on protected sites than non-protected sites, and fewer of the extinctions. So that's all really positive in terms of the impacts of those protected sites. And then we looked at using the breeding bird survey data, the effects of protected sites on overall bird abundance and trends in bird abundance. And again, largely positive stories here. So a positive effect on overall bird abundance. So you've generally got more birds on protected sites than non-protected sites. And in terms of trend, although there was no overall effect across species, across all protected sites, we did find a statistically significant association with SPAs, which is, as I said, are the protected sites which are most targeted at birds. And also the positive effects that we found on protected sites were most apparent for our rarest, declining and most highest conservation priority species. So overall, this study provides really strong evidence that protected sites are delivering in a major way for bird species, and particularly for the rarest species that you'd want to benefit most from those protected sites. And the analysis we undertook of the ringing data provided a nice link to that benefit being associated with improvements in breeding success, so therefore likely linked to improvements in environmental quality. Since then, again, with additional support through the TSDA, we've then undertaken additional analysis to look at whether there's a link between the site condition of those protected sites as measured by favourable or unfavourable conservation status. And what we found actually using the data for England, Wales and Scotland, for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, all of whom sort of collated that condition data in the same way, there was indeed a more positive association of bird abundance and population trend on protected sites that are in favourable condition relative to unfavourable condition, which is what this plot shows. We didn't find that same effect for England, where the condition metrics were summarised in a different way. But I think this does provide evidence for a potential link that improving site conditions, which is another policy target, may also help deliver improvements for species abundance targets as well. And we're now undertaking further work through the Biodiversity Pathways project, which is a collaboration between JNCC, UKCEH, BTO and Cambridge University to model different solutions to delivering a nature positive future through increasing protected area extent, protected area condition, and those protected sites being a focus of direct conservation and intentional conservation action. So just to kind of conclude and wrap this bit up, which I hope has been a demonstration actually of the value of these schemes to answer policy questions, important policy questions in a flexible way. I think we can show that the protected areas are actually well targeted within the UK and in each of the countries, and there's a strong evidence base for them benefiting, particularly, as I said, the rare, declining and habitat specialist bird species, and also range expanding pollinators. We know from a range of other studies that they deliver benefits in the context of a changing climate. And as I've said, our ongoing modelling work is currently identifying the relative merits of prioritising extension versus improvements in quality for those protected sites. And we're also collaborating with butterfly conservation to undertake similar analyses on the effectiveness of protected sites on butterflies and moths. So watch this space for that piece of work to be coming out over the course, hopefully, of the next year or so. And finally, JNCC have just published a policy brief on the back of all of this work, and the link is underneath the photograph there and available on their website. So that provides a nice digestible summary of everything that I've talked about. But that's everything from me now, and I think I'm handing over to Diana.
Yeah, thanks, James. So I will highlight some of the work that we've been doing under our second core challenge, which is about exploring new data streams. And like many parts of our lives, new tools and technologies are coming onto the scene, which have quite far-reaching consequences for how we do biodiversity monitoring. So these new data streams are coming from new sensors, including acoustic sensors, computer vision systems, but also from new apps or new software, which is changing how we process and analyze the data. So we've been thinking a bit about how we can make use of these new data streams, and also how they would work alongside some of the traditional data streams that we've been already using for our questions, like you heard about from James. So for instance, in a piece of work shown on the left here with the maps of the UK, we've been looking at the coverage of our existing data, both from a taxonomic perspective, but also from a spatial and temporal perspective, to understand which species and which regions and which times are already well sampled by traditional data streams, traditional monitoring. And this is pointed towards some kind of gaps in the data, which could be opportunities for where we could target some of these new technologies. And another piece of work shown by the icon in the middle here, the report, the data integration report, we've been thinking about if we had these multiple data streams, so that's including the traditional data streams as well as these new data streams, how would we go about integrating them together to ask the questions that we have, for instance, about species long-term trends? And what could be the benefits to integrating different kinds of data? Would it help us, for instance, produce more accurate estimates of species long-term trends? Or would it even allow us to go beyond the national level biodiversity indicators that you saw earlier from Nikki, towards more regional or local scale predictions about how biodiversity is changing? So there's lots of action in this area. I'll go in a little bit deeper on one specific piece of work we've been doing this year, which has been reviewing a whole suite of new tools and technologies and identifying how they could be used within the TEPoP structured and unstructured schemes. So you can see here in black all the different tools and technologies that we've kind of reviewed their application for. And that's including tools to help us collect data more efficiently. That's including acoustic sensors, but also DNA, drones, radar even. There's a whole suite of kind of options out there for recording biodiversity. In the middle, we've been looking also at what's out there for helping us analyze and process the data. Of course, that's including LLMs, like many of us are thinking about right now, but also including how we can better use computing infrastructure, how we can use machine learning to sort of more efficiently process the data. And that's including sort of automated species identification, for instance, from images or sounds. And finally, on the right column, which is a little bit less thought about so far, is options for using new tools and technologies to rather support the volunteer community. As Nikki mentioned, all this effort is really based on kind of volunteers going out there and collecting species observations. What tools are available that could either support them in their actions, so sustain their long-term involvement, but also improve the data that they're collecting. So whether that's via sort of automated feedback on the species observation accuracy, or using sort of verification tools to check the quality of the data that's coming in. So there's obviously a lot of options in this area. So we've been thinking also about how would we go, what's the best way for us to go about identifying sort of priorities for sort of further investment in our time and thinking. And as part of this work, we've been reaching directly out to the different TEPoP schemes to ask them, what are they already interested in and what are they already trialing and thinking about. And this has been based on the different tools that I showed in the previous slide. And this is highlighting, there's already a lot of thinking in this area. Many of the schemes are already testing out some of these tools and seeing what works for them. This process has already highlighted some commonalities across the schemes where multiple schemes are interested in trialing the same tool or technology. For instance, verification tools was coming out here as something that many schemes are interested in, so actively developing or working with us on. And another part of this work was reaching out even further, so beyond the schemes, but a more diverse set of stakeholders to also gain their perspectives on which kinds of tools and technologies do they think would be interesting for developing this area. So this slide here, I don't expect you to read the text, but this is an output from an online workshop that we had earlier this year to discuss with these range of stakeholders, for instance, what would they see as the most exciting benefits of implementing tools like acoustic sensors or computer vision, or also what could be the sort of new questions that we might be able to ask that we've so far been limited if we implemented some of these new tools and technologies, and also flagging up some of the sort of risks or concerns that if we did make investments in a specific area. And so this has flagged up a few things that people are most kind of interested in exploring further. That's shown by the sort of larger font. So for instance, many people are flagged up they're interested in what could we do with this very high resolution data that we're getting from some of these data streams. So something like an acoustic sensor potentially is giving us daily, even hourly data on the state of a community. What kind of questions could we ask with that kind of data that we're simply not able to with our traditional schemes? So that could be questions about species phenology or sort of timing of movements or migration. Yeah, there's the second column here. That this is another thing that this workshop highlighted was a lot of interest in co-located data. The idea of co-located data is having data from different taxonomic groups all measured within the same site. Because right now we have many different schemes or focus on different taxa, but they're not necessarily collected in the exact same places. So if we did have different taxa being measured in the same place, it opens up a whole range of new questions that we couldn't ask before about sort of species interactions, about sort of holistic assessments of trends, including sort of ecosystem health type assessments. The third column, which was highlighted in this workshop, is something that came up before with the survey of the schemes, there's a lot of interest in how we can more efficiently develop data verification workflows, especially as citizen science is becoming sort of more popular, more routes for people to be involved. The amount of data is rapidly increasing, and that's creating a real burden on sort of human verifiers to check the data. So developing sort of new tools, probably AI-based tools that can more efficiently check the data, check the plausibility of observations, is something that many schemes and other people are interested in. And finally, the fourth column here, there's a concern or interest in how we would ensure that we continue to engage our traditional volunteer base who are using their hard-won taxonomic expertise and their great fieldwork skills to collect data, continuing to engage them whilst at the same time trialing some of these new tools and technologies. So how do we ensure complementarity of all these different efforts? They're the things that have been flagged as sort of priorities for further thinking in this area for TSDA, and we'll come back to that at the end about how we plan to pick up on some of these ideas. And I'll now hand over to Michael, I think.
Thank you, Diana. So as Diana and James have talked about, we depend on this incredible cohort of 100,000 or so volunteers involved each year. And this third challenge, is around not simply doing stuff to them and telling people to do things, but as we think about developing, as we think about using technology, doing it in a way that's volunteer-centered, really understanding the motivations, the incentives, the feedback that people would like, and doing that. So that's been really important, and we wanted this to effectively be underpinning a lot of the stuff that we were doing in terms of that practical engagement. So one example that we've invested quite a lot of time in across the TSDA partnership recently is around the question of habitat recording. And we've done that because of the nudge from the government agencies to be saying, well, actually, habitat data is something that's really valuable. And so it'd be awesome if that group of 100,000 volunteers were going out recording habitats as well, not just species. And so we've done various pieces of work thinking about this. One of them is to be able to really explore, well, why record habitat, and what are some of the barriers that people might find in terms of recording habitat. Even when we talk about habitat, well, that's all very well, but we don't actually need many more records about where woods are. That's pretty straightforward to get from Earth observation data. So what sort of scale of habitat are we talking about? What are we talking about quality of habitat instead? What are the needs for the data users, and how can that align well with the motivations of recorders? So we've done, through surveys and through more in-depth engagement, exploring different tools, we've done some of that about what's the potential for people to get more involved in recording habitats, and then thinking about this confluence of people's motivation, their confidence in recording, and the accuracy with which they can record to the desired level. So generating this framework of questions which can guide people who are thinking about engaging volunteers in this way. So as I say, that's been something that's been strongly guided by the government agencies in terms of that ask and that request of us in our development of these schemes. And just three other very brief examples where we've been exploring this as well. One has been around the targeting revisits maps, developing this really simple tool, which is helping to nudge recorders, collect the data from where we need it most. The second one is some work on recording metadata. So people who go out recording species, they could be recording a whole load of other things. They could be recording complete lists of species. They could be recording how long that they go recording for, in order for us to make better use of these data. So that aligns very much with what Diana was talking about earlier. But is that acceptable to people? Are people willing to do it? And so we've done work exploring that. And then the third one is that we recognise that there are parts of the country where we've got these structured recording schemes, but actually the uptake of squares is really low. It's not surprising, because there are lower numbers of people living in some of these areas. And one of the particular areas of interest is Northern Ireland. And so we worked with people from 20 different organisations, trying to identify things like the barriers to data flow and solutions and various things like this, to be able to come together and propose how we can better support structured schemes within these sorts of places, within places like Northern Ireland or the uplands of Wales or Scotland. So we've really, as I say, been trying to embed thinking about the volunteers at the centre of all that we do, rather than it being an add-on at the end. Hopefully we have awed you with all the amazing stuff that we're doing. What's the benefits of you to engage with the TSDA? Well, as Nikki said at the start, it's about supporting those strategic needs of country agencies. We know that country agencies and others, researchers and various others, depend upon these data, the structured, the unstructured, the semi-structured data that we get in. And what we're seeking to do with funding that we get is to strengthen that future evidence base on behalf of other organisations, and using the data, best using the data to address like really current questions. Another quote from NRW there, talking about how this has been really important to support their evidence needs. And one of their evidence needs is around area statements. So thinking about, well, we might be able to get country indicators, but can we get sub-country indicators? And that's led on to some of the work on the data integration. DERA up in Northern Ireland have been really key in terms of shaping some of these questions around the needs for structured scheme support in these less well recorded areas. And we've heard in detail about the protected area work, but this was actually delivered through the top-up funding that we received from country agencies, basically saying, this is something that's really important to us. Can you help us answer these questions? So we believe that this provides really great value for money, actually, across the country agencies. But our dream and our vision is way bigger than what we can achieve simply with the funding that we've got. And so that value of partnership working, there are a range of different funders who've been involved in funding work within and across the TSDA partnership in order to address some of these things in even richer and deeper ways. And that's really important. Are you interested in being involved and shaping some of the bits of work that we're going to be doing? I just want to run through, I think it's 11 pieces of work. I'll go through them briefly because you will have heard them flagged up already. So we're looking at the pros and cons of co-location in terms of survey effort, how we communicate scheme coverage and risk of bias to data users. We're going to be thinking increasingly about two big areas of work. One is about climate change adaptation indicators. How do we do that from scheme data? The second one is about freshwater data. We've got loads of information on species from freshwaters. How do we integrate that to understand more about ecosystem health? And how do we better understand those conservation interventions using the data that we've got? Thinking about the second and the third challenges, as Diana talked about, we're thinking about those priorities for new technology. One of those is about how we provide effective, personalised, automated feedback. We're thinking about the potential for automated record verification, doing that in an automated way, and thinking more about habitat recording with citizen scientists. So if some of what you've heard piques your interest, you can get in contact with us. Finally, about recording better metadata and continuing the work on targeting recorder effort to fill data gaps. At which point I'll hand back to Nikki in order to close this session.
Thanks very much, Michael, and to James and Diana as well. And thanks everyone for your time today. Hopefully after today's event, we hope you've got a bit more awareness of what TSDA is doing, who we are, and perhaps are interested in finding out more. As Michael said, it would be great to engage more with you to help us maximise the impact of these schemes and their valuable data. And working through TSDA, we think, is an efficient way of doing this. We've really only scratched the surface of TSDA today in terms of looking at the breadth and depth of the areas that we've explored. So if you do want to find out more, please have a look at our web pages. There's a link on the slide you can click. We've also created a series of 5-minute videos this year about each of our TSDA tasks to give you a bit more information about them and hopefully not taking up too much of your time. And you can click the links again on here. We've set up a Microsoft form where you can register your interest in finding out more about the TSDA tasks as they develop, or you can get involved with steering our planned tasks over the coming year. So please do let us know on there if you want. And we're also really interested to know what you'd like to hear more about or discuss, and we're happy to have follow-up conversations about our work, either with individuals or with your organisation. So do get in touch with us about that. And last but not least, there's a form to give feedback on today's event that's linked on the slide here, and would really value your thoughts to help us steer planning for our future events and how we collaborate as TEPoP going forwards.